I'm Tope Pearson. I'm here on behalf of Heart newspaper, and I have with me today Dr Gary Chapman, who's best-selling author of The 5 Love Languages. So it's such a pleasure to have you with us, Gary.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for coming. I know you were a pastor before, and you used to pastor and counsel married couples, and you had the idea to produce small booklets, is that right? And out of that came the 5 Love Languages. Could you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, I have served on the same church staff for 50 years. And I recently, a year and a half ago, officially retired, but they let me keep my office and they let me keep my assistant.
Okay.
So if I'm in town, I'm there every day. And over those 50 years, as an associate pastor, I've done many things. I directed all of our adult education program. I focused for 10 years on college ministry. We have a university in our town. And then I focused on it for 10 years on single adults. But all of that time, I have marriage and family counseling has been a part of my ministry. And most of my books grew out of that counseling ministry. And that's why this book on the 5 love languages grew out of my counseling couples.
Yes.
So the books are an overflow of my life.
Wonderful. That's amazing. So how do we actually develop our primary and secondary love languages, and why is it constant over a lifetime?
The first question, I don't know. I'm often asked that question. Is it nature or is it nurture? I do know that it's there very early. You can identify a child's primary love language by the time they're 4 years old. Just observe their behavior. How do they respond to you? For example, my son, his language is physical touch. When he was that age, I would come home from work, he would run to the door, grab my legs and climb on me. He's touching me. Our daughter at that age never did that. She would say, "Daddy, come into my room, I want to show you something." She wanted quality time. So it's there rather early, but I don't know really what part is nature and what part is nurture. And whether or not the way parents respond to the child would influence that. Now obviously, parents can teach their children how to speak any of these languages, and often they do. But what they teach them is not necessarily their primary love language. So I don't know to that part. Now, do they stay consistent through a lifetime? I think typically yes, but there are seasons of life and circumstances where another love language may become more important. For example, a mother who has 2 preschool children, during those years, acts of service may not have been her language, but during those years, it will likely be her language. So I think there are circumstances like that. For example, if a husband hears his wife on the phone and she is getting word that a family member has died, physical touch may not be her language, but in that moment, holding her while she's weeping may be the most powerful expression of love that he could give. So I think circumstances and seasons of life, there may be changes.
Wow. Okay, thank you. So describe the love tank game.
Well, I like to picture inside every child and every adult, there is an emotional love tank. And when the love tank is full in a marriage, life is beautiful. When the love tank is empty, life looks pretty dark. So a little game that I sometimes suggest for couples is that periodically you say to your spouse, on a scale of 0 to 10, how full is your love tank? And they give you a reading. If they say anything less than 10, you say, what could I do to help fill it? And so they give you a suggestion. And that suggestion, if you play that game, they will answer their primary love language more often than the other languages. Now, they may mention on a particular day something that's not their primary language, but you can kind of pick up on their language by just recording their answers. But it gives you immediate information that today, this is the thing that would make me feel loved.
Wow.
So it's a fun game, and it keeps it on the front burner.
Oh, I'll put that into practice, actually. So if our partner won't play, how can we discover that, apart from if they won't play that game? How can we discover their primary and perhaps secondary?
I think one is what I've just mentioned, and that is you observe their behavior. How do they typically respond to other people?
Yes.
If you hear your spouse always giving other people affirming words, that's a clue that that's probably their language, because typically we speak the language we want to receive.
Yes.
That's not always true. That's true about 75% of the time.
Yes.
So that's a clue. Secondly is, what do they complain about? The complaint reveals the love language. If a wife says, I just feel like we don't spend any time together. I just feel like we're ships passing in the night. She's saying quality time is my language, and I'm not getting quality time. Or if he says, I don't think you would ever touch me if I didn't initiate it, he's telling her, you don't touch me. She's complaining about it. Even a child, like a mother said to me some time ago, my 6-year-old son said to me, we don't ever go to the park anymore since the baby came. See, he used to have his wife, his mother's quality time, her undivided attention. Now the baby's here. He's not getting it. So we tend to get defensive if our spouse complains, but really they're giving us valuable information. And then the third thing is, what do they request most often? If a husband or wife is saying, you think we could take a walk after dinner? They're asking for quality time. Or you think we could get a weekend away, just the two of us? They're asking for quality time. So if you put those three things together, you can pretty well figure out, your own love language as well as the other person's love language.
Oh, thank you. That was useful. Thank you. So in your study of the human race, how did this shape your theory with the five love languages?
Really what surprised me is that the book has been published in over 50 languages. Because with my background in anthropology, cultural anthropology, I understand that social and cultural differences. So when the Spanish publisher came, they were the first to ask for permission to print it. I said to my publisher, I don't know if this works in Spanish culture. And they said, well, they've read the book and they want to publish it. I said, okay. And it became their bestseller. So that was a surprise to me, because I discovered this kind of in middle America. And knowing how different cultures are, I wasn't sure that it had application in other cultures. But at this point, because in many of those countries, it has become the bestseller for the publisher, I'm now pretty well convinced that these languages are part of human nature. Now, the way we express the languages are different in different cultures. For example, physical touch. As you know, there are countries where when you greet someone, you kiss them on this cheek and you kiss them on this cheek. But we wouldn't do that in America, but it's physical touch. And in that culture, it's appropriate physical touch. I had a friend who was, I forget what country he was in Africa, and he was there with a Christian athletic program. And they told him, said, now, if one of the other players reaches over and holds your hand, that's an expression of it's fine. They do that. Two men wouldn't typically hold hands walking down the street. So the dialects of the languages will differ in different cultures, but the five seem to be pretty fundamental to human nature.
Oh, no, thank you. And so how did your Christian faith help you shape this message?
Well, of course, I've been a Christian through that whole journey, and the book came, 30 years ago, but I think because the central theme of the Bible is love. The Bible even says God is love. It's one of the fundamental characteristics of God is love. And Jesus said, you love others the way I love you. which his attitude was, I'm here to serve people. He said about himself, I did not come to be served. I came to serve.
That's right.
And of course give his life a ransom for others. So I think my relationship with God gave me a focus on love, because to me it's the central theme of the Christian life. And I don't know how directly it affected the 5 love languages, but it certainly was a part of my thinking and my processing all information.
Yes.
Is through a lens of love. We're here to love.
Yes. You don't seem to mention God specifically
Yeah.
in the 5 languages.
Yeah.
Is there any reason for that?
Yeah.
Yes.
We specifically wrote this book hoping to attract non-Christians.
Right.
Moody Publishers in Chicago is a Christian publishing house.
Yes.
And they've published books for years.
Uh-huh.
But they had just come up with the idea, what if we publish some books that are specifically geared to non-Christians? And the basic difference is we will not quote scriptures.
Sure.
If we are going to quote something from the Old Testament, or something, we might say, an ancient Hebrew proverb says. You know, there's no indication that's in the Bible, but it is.
Yes.
So that was on purpose.
Yes.
Knowing that Christians would know that love is a central theme in the Christian life, and all of these are illustrated in the Bible. In fact, later on, I wrote a book called God Speaks Your Love Language, in which I indicated that we tend to be drawn to Christ initially in our conversion experience with our love language. If physical touch is your language, many of these people have a dramatic conversion. I mean, their body shakes, their tears are flowing, they sense God touched me. Not everybody has that kind of experience, you know. So, but that's the reason that we wrote this book. In the end of the book, what I do say is this. I said, I've given you information on how to effectively love another person. Yes. I can't give you motivation. But I can tell you where I get my motivation. And I share a two paragraph of my faith in Christ and how the love of God has motivated me to love others. And that God, to be more specific, the Bible says God's love is poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit. So we're just channels of God's love. You know?
Praise God. That's wonderful. Yeah, and I love songs of songs, and I'm sure you do, in the Bible, and by Solomon. And there's a little verse here in chapter 4 where he speaks, and the man speaks. He says, "You are altogether beautiful, my darling. There is no flaw in you. Come with me to Lebanon, my bride. Come with me from Lebanon." And as I study this, and we all know as Christians that this is a symbolic of Christ loving the bride of Christ. Yeah. And as I studied it, I found in this unique relationship that the primary love languages were, the main two were words of affirmation and quality time. Why do you think this might be?
I don't know that I can answer that. I do use that when I speak on the in-love experience, falling in love. Because in that chapter, he's talking to her. In the other chapter, she's talking to him about how wonderful he is and all this, you know. I think that's it. I'm just thinking out loud now. When you look back to Adam, when he saw Eve, I don't know what all he said, but, but he was wowed, you know. So I think we have a natural attraction for each other, you know, male and female, and God made us that way for each other. And consequently, if you see beauty, you express, you know, just kind of natural to express appreciation for the beauty that you see. That's the only thought I have in terms of why that might be.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And so for a husband and wife working away apart from each other, how would you help them put into practice physical touch if that was one of their main primary love languages?
Yeah, that's a question that I addressed in the military edition of the 5 love languages. Military chaplains kept saying to me when I would speak, you need to write one for the military. Use military illustrations and focus on how to speak these languages when they are deployed.
Yeah.
Because you would think physical touch would be impossible.
Of course, yeah.
So we interviewed scores of military couples to get ideas. So on physical touch, for example, one wife said, my husband's language is physical touch. So while he was deployed, I traced my hand on a sheet of paper and mailed it to him with a note that said, put your hand on my hand, I want to hold your hand. Later, he told me, every time I put my hand on that paper, I felt her. So it's not literal touch, it's emotional touch, but that's what we're talking about. Yeah, and another lady said, well, I knew his language was physical touch, so when I had my hair cut, I put some of my hair in an envelope and mailed it to him and said, you can't touch me, but you can touch my hair.
Beautiful.
So in that book, we give illustrations of how you can speak all of these languages when you're deployed. And of course, today's technology makes it even easier. Like quality time, you know, you can do FaceTime and just sit there and talk to each other, though you're half a world away, you know. Or you can watch the same movie and then discuss the movie, you know. So quality time, words of affirmation, it's much easier today.
Yes.
When my dad was in the military in the Second World War, it was just letters. He wrote letters and mother wrote letters. You know? Mother wrote him a letter every day. But he sometimes got them in bundles because mail didn't come every day. But he said, I read every one of them. And I remember as a child, we would get a letter from Dad and Mother would read it to my sister and I, you know. And he would always say, give your mother a hug for me. And he always say, obey your mother.
It's just as important.
Yeah. So even then, you know, they were giving words of affirmation in letters, and also the letter can be satisfying to quality time because you're sitting there reading, and realizing he wrote this.
Of course.
You know, this took time for him to write this, and then you can also go back and read it again and again. So there's a sense, you know, there's some quality time
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. So, why do you think that young people today struggle in this area of love, especially in view that not many of them get married or want to get married? Why do you think that's so?
Well, I think there are a lot of children that grow up in homes where they do not feel loved. It doesn't mean the parents don't love them.
No.
But the parents are not speaking a language that communicates to them. So if you grow up feeling unloved, it impacts the rest of your life. And so we have a lot of young adults who don't feel loved. And so they look around them and nobody's loving. And so loneliness is a huge factor in our culture today.
Yes, it is very much so.
And I think another factor in terms of why the younger group is waiting longer to get married is that so many of them have experienced the divorce of their mom and dad. And they're saying to themselves, I don't want to do that. I don't want a divorce. I think others have observed the divorce in other families, you know, and they're just saying, this is serious stuff. You know, my son, for example, didn't get married till he was 34. But people would ask him, when are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? And he would say, when you grow up in the home of a marriage counselor, you're very careful. So he had heard all the stories, you know, and he saw all the people and all this stuff. And so he was very careful, you know, about making that decision.
Well done.
My daughter didn't get married until she was 31, but she's a medical doctor, so she went all the way through the medical process, which is like 10 or 12 years, you know. So I think there are different reasons for different couples as to why they wait, but I think that's a lot of it.
Yes, makes sense, absolutely. So, whilst you were a singer-songwriter, I hear, were you inspired to write any love songs?
No, there is a Gary Chapman who writes songs, but it's not me.
Not you. Oh, not you.
It's not me.
Would you ever think about writing a song?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't have that gift.
No.
It has to be a gift to write songs, and I don't. No. Sometimes we do get confused.
Yes.
And you know, and then also there was a Gary Chapman that married Amy Grant. Amy Grant was a singer.
Yeah.
but they got divorced.
Oh.
And I was speaking at a church one day,
Mm-hmm.
and the pastor said, I got a telephone call this week from another pastor. He said, why are you having Gary Chapman at your church speaking on marriage? He's divorced. He said, I had to explain to him, that's another Gary Chapman.
Okay, so we know that the Five Love Languages has been such a success, tremendous success actually, over 2 decades. Have you developed it, and explain how you've developed it from the very first one, which we've got an old copy of, and to the one to date?
Well, we have done a little editing along the way. Nothing major, really nothing major. But for example, technology is much more involved today than it was when the book came out.
Yes.
And so we've tried to give more illustrations like that along the way. But there's been no major changes.
No.
They've been minor updates. Yeah.
Fantastic. And so tell me more about your latest book. Well, it's one of your latest, should I say, the 5 Apology Languages.
Yeah, this one was born really in the mind of a counselor in our city who made an appointment to see me. And she said, Gary, I knew her distantly. I didn't know her very closely. But she said, she's a Christian counselor. She said, Gary, I've been using the 5 love languages for years in my counseling. But I believe that people also have an apology language. I said, what do you mean? She said, I think that what one person considers to be a sincere apology is not what another person considers to be a sincere apology. And I think couples are missing each other when they try to apologize. And as soon as she said that, I resonated with that, because for years they've sat in my office arguing about whether or not one of them apologized. You know, she would say, I would forgive him if he would just apologize. And he would say, I did apologize. And she would say, you didn't apologize. I told you I was sorry. That's not an apology. So they're arguing over whether or not he apologized. So I asked her what she wanted to do with the idea, and she said, well, I was hoping maybe we could team up and write a book on the topic. And I said, well, we'll have to do some research and make sure that it's true and find out what are the various ways that people apologize. So we asked thousands of people 2 questions. When you apologize, what do you typically say or do? Second question, when someone's apologizing to you, what do you want to hear them say or do? And their answers fell into 5 categories. And, you know, I sometimes say, we weren't looking for 5, even though I like 5. And we call them the 5 apology languages. The original title of the book was When Sorry Isn't Enough, because sorry is a kind of a typical way. But we tied it with the apology language now, with the love languages. So that's how that book came about. And so people do have different ideas on what a sincere apology is like. And and typically we learn to apologize from our parents. If our parent says, go tell sister you're sorry, then that's what we're doing when we're 23, because that's what we tell them you're sorry. If our parents taught us something else, then we say that, I was wrong, I should not have done that. So we typically learn. Now we found also this, in our culture, in the U.S., about 10% of the population almost never apologizes for anything. And most of them are men. And they learned it from their fathers, who told them, real men don't apologize. And their fathers got that from John Wayne, who said to them, real men in a movie, real men don't apologize. So I say to those guys, you know, your dad was probably a good guy. He probably did the best he could, but he had bad information. Real men do apologize. And in fact, you are not going to have a long-term healthy marriage if you don't learn how to apologize. So, and the reason I say it's an essential is because none of us are perfect.
No, that's right.
No perfect husbands, no perfect wives. And we don't have to be perfect to have good relationships. But we do have to deal with our failures. And that involves apologizing and the other person forgiving you. That's the way we keep the barriers down between the two of us.
That's fantastic. Well, Dr. Gary Chapman, that was amazing. I've got so much insight from you, and yeah, there will be an article in the newspaper soon. And,
Okay.
Thank you so much for your valuable time,
Very
and all
good.
the best with all that you choose to do in the future for you and your family.
Well, thank you.
God bless
Thank you.
God
Thank you.
bless you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Good. Now, do you do